a typical measure that's taken by independence and liberation movements, anti-colonialist movements, and so on, is to revive the indigenous language, which will inevitably have been replaced by the language of the colonizers, because, of course, colonizers don't just take land. They take our language, they take our culture, they take our identity. By forcing their language on us, they aim to control us, to break our spirit, and to erase who we were. The words you use, the words you hear, regulate your thinking. And that's what they were after, regulating your thinking, changing your thoughts, changing your mentality, and the way that you articulate the world to yourself. Reclaiming our indigenous languages is an act of defiance. It's about standing up and saying, we're not who you tried to make us. We're not who you said we are. And the world isn't the way you say the world is. It's about reclaiming our history, reclaiming our heritage and our dignity. Reviving our languages is a powerful strike against the chains of colonialism, a step towards justice, and a bold declaration of our self-determination. This is not just about words, it's about thoughts, it's about thinking. So no, I'm not just talking about language literally, like reviving Arabic or Somali or Turkish or what have you. I'm talking about the language that we use to define things, to articulate the world, our lexicon, regardless of what language you're speaking in, linguistically. Because this is about planting our feet firmly in our own paradigm. It's about breaking out of their framework for explaining the world, explaining themselves and explaining their history and explaining our history. We have to insist on our own definitions, our own framework, our own lexicon, our own thoughts. That's the language revival that I'm talking about. Because let me be blunt, their language is deception. It's literally impossible for them to not lie. You have to know this from the beginning. You have to know this each and every time you enter into any interaction with a Westerner. Every time they move their lips, they're lying. I know that sounds hyperbolic, but I'm serious. All they do is lie. And that isn't because they're always trying to lie, but it's because lies are all they have been told their whole lives. You know, not everyone who lies does so with the intention to deceive. They do it because they simply don't know the truth. So practically speaking, that comes out to be the same as lying. They're spreading falsehood, but they can't help but spread falsehood. You can only give from what you have, and what they have are lies. And you have to know that going in. The collective West, these people are deeply invested in opposing any accurate depiction of reality, because the reality that they live in, the reality of what they have done, the reality of their history, and the reality of their present is atrocious. It's inhuman. It's miserable. It's a disgraceful reality, and it has been enabled by and is maintained by continuous, incessant, comprehensive lies and deception. I don't think you can even fathom the extent of this. But you can think of it in terms of the West not actually being a society or a so-called civilization, but a cult. It's a cult. And like a cult, they have their own weird paradigm. They have their own made-up story about themselves, about their past, and so on. They have their own bizarre, esoteric set of rationales and arguments that only make sense to each other. Because the only way that you can believe them in their rationales is if you are simply contained within the rigid confines of that cult mentality. And that's what they've tried to do to the rest of us. Impose this distorted, warped understanding that's nothing but misunderstanding, or rather anti-understanding of the world. They never call things what they are. They speak in euphemisms and opposites. Because again, if they told the truth, if they were even capable of telling the truth, then the whole mirage would dissolve. I mean, think about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said. They seek to extinguish the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? With their mouths. Means with their words, with the language they use, their linguistic framing of things, means their propaganda. For instance, modernity. Take the word modernity. Actually, modernity just means today, the present, whatever pertains to the modern age, the present age, whatever age that is. You know, what was considered modern 500 years ago was modernity 500 years ago. But the way they use modernity is like some new achievement in the world. But it doesn't refer to technology, you know, actual innovations in science or what have you. That's not what they mean. Modernity doesn't mean cars and mobile phones and container shipping and birth control. I mean, it actually does refer to this, but that isn't the way they use it. That's not what they mean when they talk about modernity. What they mean by modernity is Western supremacy, Western hegemony, Western domination. That's what they're really talking about. But by substituting their supremacy with the word modernity, then they can make it sound like and make you think that Western supremacy is just a natural progression of human affairs. It's as an essential a part of life as technology. And any opposition to Western supremacy is regressive. It's like wanting to go back to the days of horse and carriage. All ways of being that do not conform to Western supremacy and uphold Western supremacy are antiquated, out of date, obsolete, old-fashioned, and backwards. You see how they do? With just this one word, modernity, they delegitimize and invalidate any and all rejection of Western domination. That's why you can't use their definitions. You can't use words the way that they use the same words, because they always misuse them. And if you misuse them the same way that they misuse them, then you will inevitably start thinking the way that they do. They use language to hypnotize you until you just become another player in their virtual reality game. We know that there's a seal on their hearing, on their hearts, and on a veil over their vision. So very literally, they are incapable of surveying and understanding or conveying reality. You know, if you ask a blind man to describe how something looks and you believe his description instead of what you see with your own eyes, well, I don't know who's more blind, him or you. You should have never asked him in the first place. You should have never asked him to describe something in the first place, because you know he can't see, much less treated his definition as, or his description as definitive. When you do this, it disables your ability to not only understand yourself and your society properly, but also to correctly understand objectively their society. So you have to dismantle the whole architecture of falsehood and deception that permeates their whole discourse, not only for our own sake, but for theirs as well. I mean, first and foremost, we have to do it because as Muslims, the truth is paramount to us. We're witnesses to mankind. So we have to be reliable witnesses, and that means being objective, and it means being accurate. Muslims are the only ones who are religiously obligated to see and understand the world as it really is, obligated to be realistic and unbiased in our assessment and in our judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us against following our own inclinations. So this has to be expanded to include not only not following our own inclinations, but not following those who follow their own inclinations, who do nothing but follow their own inclinations. You can't be impartial and unbiased if you're accepting a version of reality from those who are biased and those who are partial. This is basic. They are fundamentally what is referred to in literature as unreliable narrators. And again, I'm not just talking about, not believing when they tell you some piece of news, no, or some version of history. I'm talking about what it has done to them to have been raised from birth on incessant lies and fake history, and what it has done to them to live in a world confined within the parameters and within the framework of their cult mentality, their cult paradigm, a cult paradigm that completely prohibits them from recognizing, much less acknowledging or understanding reality as it actually is, which includes the reality of their own actions and their own behavior. They're prohibited from understanding it. We get moved into their paradigms without even realizing it, because we don't grasp the massive cultural and historical context of reality avoidance that underlies everything they say and everything they believe. We take them at face value, which you absolutely cannot do. You cannot afford to accept their words as honest, even if they're saying what they're saying sincerely, because as I said, they may very well believe what they're saying. They may actually think that it's reasonable and sensible and true, what they're saying. But we're obliged, in my opinion, it's our duty, in my opinion, to dissect whatever they say, like performing an autopsy to determine the time of death and the cause of death. We have to do an examination to determine the cause of the deception and the time when they lost connection to the truth. I'll give you an easy example: capitalism. People have been trading and transacting for centuries, not just bartering, but buying and selling with money for centuries. Adam Smith didn't create markets. He didn't invent markets. He just came up with a theory, a fabricated codification of rules that already existed in business, and he turned it into an ism. And the idea of capitalism is to pursue wealth and prosperity, free markets, and so on. Well, the actual rule is that you're supposed to be dedicated to my wealth and my prosperity, the employer, the boss, the company. So you're actually in capitalism required to subordinate your wealth and your prosperity to mine. This is capitalism in a nutshell. This then became the mentality of colonization. You, your people, your country, Africa, Asia, Latin America, wherever, your function in life is to make me richer. And that's called me civilizing you. If you're not devoted to my prosperity, then you're primitive and problematic. This is how it actually plays out. But that's not what they'll say, because the lies are endless. They claim freedom and liberty and, valuing the individual, human rights, civil rights, and all that. And they claim that they're the most free, that they have the greatest liberty, the most rights, and that they uphold the value of the individual more than anyone else. But what freedoms do they actually have that don't exist elsewhere? What's actually unique and special about their liberty? It's a lie. First of all, it's a lie that this is or should be or even practically can be the highest priority and principle of a society, freedom. And second of all, there's the unavoidable fact that it simply is not their highest priority and principle. I mean, there are more laws in America than any other country in the world. They rush to suspend so-called freedoms the moment anyone raises a real or imagined security concern. They abandon this alleged sacred principle at the drop of a hat. They'll ditch freedom and liberty like Ray Liotta flushing cocaine down the toilet in Goodfellas. I was in Turkey when the attempted coup happened. It was a long night, but the very next morning, restaurants and cafes and shops were open and operating on the streets where tanks had been rolling just hours before, and everything got right back to normal. Can you imagine what any Western country would have been like after something like that? What America would be like if the military tried to take over the White House? Why, it would be martial law. It'd be severe repression, surveillance, police state conditions, not for hours, not for weeks. Why, it would be like that for years, if not permanently. I mean, look how much surveillance and how much restrictions and how much monitoring and checks that they have right now without an attempted coup. And look at how violent that society is. You think that's not a restriction on freedom? Street crime? School shootings, mass shootings, drugs, gangs, drive-bys, on and on. Well, you're safer in a literal war zone than in most American cities. That's a restriction on freedom. No, we have to look at the West, look at the world from our vantage point, from our perspective, our paradigm, our understanding, and in our language, according to our terms and our definitions. Everything that they say is obfuscation, misinformation, disinformation, and deformation of reality. Nothing is ever going to make sense as long as we go along with that. Another example, and I've talked about this before, is how they want to partition their history according to, pre-Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment, modern and postmodern, and so on. No, this is just them telling themselves about how much they have progressed and how much they have advanced while actually standing still. We can't just believe them when they say how much more evolved they are now and how much more civilized and how enlightened they are now compared to the past. No, you have to substantiate that, and you can't. From Viking raids to drone strikes, from feudalism to corporatism, they have remained exactly as they always were. I don't care if you used to listen to the Pope and now you listen to BlackRock, it all plays out the same. You can tell yourselves that it's different and that it's more advanced now, but no one has to participate in that fantasy that you hold about yourself. And not only do we not have to participate in this fantasy, actually we have to not participate in it, because we have to stand for truth. We have to combat falsehood wherever it is, and we owe it to each other and to them as fellow human beings to try as much as we can to dispel confusion and manipulation and misguidance. Because what that so-called civilization has done to its own people is actually even worse than what they've done to us. So we have to protect ourselves from having happened to us what happened to them, which is this brainwashing, this indoctrination and disconnection from reality, from understanding. Because, alhamdulillah, in reality, we have been comparatively unaffected by all that. In the Muslim world and in the global South, we have been relatively unaffected, not entirely unaffected, but compared to Westerners, and unfortunately compared to many Muslims in the West, we have come out comparatively unscathed. You know, of course, in the Muslim world, you will have westernized Muslims, usually from the upper classes, which are historically the collaborator class, the indoctrinated class, you know, the people who used to be the sycophants for the colonizers back in the day. And they will adhere to Western reality avoidance, Western paradigms, and they'll play along with that. They may actually even believe in the fantasy. And the so-called intelligentsia and the intellectuals in the Muslim world are generally drawn from this group. So then they become the propagators of Western frameworks and Western discourse in the Muslim world. So there is a need for educated Muslims in the Muslim world, intellectuals in the Muslim world, to discard the intellectual language of the West and to confront the falsehood of that language by means of our own intellectual Islamic language. And of course, it's vital for Western Muslims who are immersed in the propaganda and in the indoctrination at all times to try to decolonize their paradigms for understanding the world and reject Western definitions and terms and representations of the West, of the world, and of us, and of reality. Because if you can control the way things are discussed, if you control the way things are talked about, then you control the way things are thought about. So when you give up controlling how things are talked about, then you give up control over your own perception of reality. And if you give up control over your own perception of reality, then you're nothing but a helpless and defenseless fool who will find himself in slavery and in subjugation without even knowing it, just like the Westerners.